So today we're working on a 95 Geo Prism, and this one has all the bells and whistles on it. When you ever look at a labor program, it'll say add for power steering, add 0.2 hours for air conditioning, add for 4-wheel, etc., etc. This doesn't have 4-wheel drive, but it's got everything else: air conditioning, power steering, cruise control. And it seems like the way that it's added really buggers up the timing belt job. It would definitely be an add to type scenario. So when you look down in here, we're going to show you the ins and outs of getting this done. This one was rough because everything was leaking. The cam seal, which is right down in here, was leaking. The crank seal, or the timing seal down here, was leaking. And I couldn't get this gear off. You can see the gear just pulls right off. And then there's a cotter key, or a Woodruff key, whatever. And so I had to get this off to get that done. And it had a little notch on the inside. This was the hardest part of the whole job. You can see that there's just a little bit of a transition between this being shiny and this being rusted. And the key itself had a little notch in the top of it, so that was catching on this, and it was all rusted together. It was really tough. See all my little Dremel marks, because there's also a ding, and I thought the ding had Play-Dohed up some steel and it was hitting against that. So I went in with the Dremel just to clean that up a little bit, and it still didn't come off. So anyway, this gear is a little different. If you look in the manual, it'll show a smooth gear with a little notch, and the notch will be right about there, and your key will be at 12 o'clock straight up. And there's also a little tab that the tensioner goes on. You can see that it's right there. And that's the little pivot point for the tensioner that bolts in here for the timing belt. So those are a couple ways to line up the timing, but in this case, the center of this goes where the little dot is. There's a little dot right here on the oil pump housing. So that dot needs to go in the middle of here, or where the notch is if you have a smooth one, but this has a tone wheel or an exciter ring on it for the crankshaft position sensor. So we'll put this back on and tell you a little bit about doing the water pump on this little humma-jumma. This particular one, you can see where the timing belt cover goes right here. You'll have a pulley for the water pump that'll block that cover so that you can't get it off easily unless you unbolt this. Now this sits lower were it not for us having the engine jacked up on the jack there. So you pull the bolts out, and usually the easiest way to do that is to bind between the water pump weep hole, the upper one that's not used, and the pulley. And this one, because it has power steering, this is a power steering pulley here, it has a fatter pulley on it, so you can't just take this off and set it aside. So you can take it off from the pump, and then it has to float, and that'll enable you to get to the bolts all the way around. But when you take the pump out, you want to pull the pulley with it, you know, just floppy like this. And very important, when you put the new pump back in, you need to make sure that your pulley's there too, or else you'll be stuck. You won't be able to get it on. You'll have to pull it back off and then do it over again. There's 3 bolts that hold this water pump in place, and they're 12 millimeter. It's this one right here, this one here, and then there's another one that's down at the bottom there. Now those hold it to the block.
Show them again? Sorry. Okay. Can you show those again? It was
okay, there's the one at the bottom.
Okay.
There's one right here. And then this one up here.
Okay.
And they're all 12 millimeter. And then there's 4 10 millimeter bolts. There's one here, one there, one here, and then another one way down the back side. You can lower the motor down and get to that from underneath if you need to. Now there's 2 pieces to this. There's the split line right here, and this split line is where the water pump stops, and then there's just that little adapter housing back here. And you have coolant going into the block here, and there's just an O-ring behind that, and then there's a hose on the back side. And I'll switch places with Spanky here, and I'll show you what we had going on back there. You've got a hose, and the hose in this case was bloated. It's supposed to be straight and smooth, but you can see this one is about to burst. You know, it's really soft and it's sticking out everywhere. So where that is located back down behind there. You can see the hose clamps on it. I'm sun flaring it, aren't I? Let me see if I can put a laser on it. I will light you up with my laser. See that hose right there? So the housing goes into that casting there, and it's a little tricky. It's easiest to just undo the clamp that's on the farthest point toward the motor back here, the further back one, and then just pull the whole thing out together but it has to be apart from the water pump. Now to make all of this happen, you have to pull the motor mount. There's a motor mount that's here, and this is half of the motor mount action. There's another motor mount that goes into these holes, the hole here and the hole here, and also here. So you gotta pull those 3 bolts. And in our case, because we have cruise control, we had to take all the cruise control stuff off. And if you look over here, you can see the layout of our illustrious cruise control bracketry, and then the motor mount that you see here. It's got a couple of studs that stick down, so you got to get 2 of the nuts from underneath, and then you have to pull the bolt from the top. I'd do those and then pull the 3 that are there that I showed with the laser just a second ago. But once you get all of this torn down, it gives you a lot better access. You'll see that we have the oil dipstick tube just kicking around here. Where that plugs in is on the back of the cylinder head. There's a bolt that goes in right here for that. You pull that bolt out and then just twist the oil dipstick tube and it'll come right out. So we're not going to give every little detail of this job. I don't have time to do that, unfortunately. But I will say that the job's not so bad once you know some of the fundamentals. Now I've showed you the bottom timing mark, and that's fine and great, and they vary as I stated before. But the upper timing mark, you can see that there's a little sight right here, a little hole. And if you go with the camera up over the top, you can see that there's a little mark. There's a little divot right here on the seal cap. So when that is even with this, if you come around to the other side, it's easiest to line it up from the other side. If you look down over the fender, you can look at it this way, and that's fine and great. I like to look over the top and just look at it from that little mark here and this little mark here, and just line it up like a rifle sight or a pistol sight. This is the more important mark to set before you take the belt off than the bottom one. This one is the critical mark, and it will get the other one in the neighborhood. Remember that this turns 1 time for every 2 times the crank turns. So your crank could be lined up properly, and then this might be upside down. But if you line this one up, your crank will be right. So, by way of detail, I don't know if you noticed, if you come back around to this side, but the water pump is not timing belt driven on this model. This is the 1.8 liter, again it's a 1995. But this water pump, you know, it's pinned in because you can't get to the water pump unless you take the timing belt off. And that's the way they are a lot of the time with the timing belt driven water pumps. So it's one of those things where you want to replace it while you're in there because it's overlapping labor times. This one's longer to do the pump than just the belt because it's a lot more work getting in behind here and dealing with the spilled antifreeze and everything. But you can see this is the line where the timing cover is. And so you can see that this part of the pump would have been covered up by the timing belt. So you do have to take the timing belt off to get to the water pump. But if the water pump failed, it would not break the timing belt because the timing belt isn't running the water pump. It's run on serpentine belts. You'd overheat, it'd still break down, but it wouldn't cause any damage to the engine. This one's kind of a fun motor because it's dual overhead cam, but you only have 1 cam wheel. You just have this guy right here. When you look at the cam gears, I'm going to get out of the way so the camera person can stand here. When you look at the cam gears, you can see that there's a little dot right here, and then there's another dot right there. And when those two are kissing, like little kissing fish, then you know that you're at top dead center, and this mark's lined up too. So dual cams, dual overhead cam because they're over the top of the head, and single cam gear. That makes for an easier timing belt procedure. It saves you on labor time, and your overall cost of ownership's lower with this design, which is nice. So hope you like this video. As far as the tensioner goes, and when you go to put the belt on, make sure to put the belt so that there's no slack on this side, and then the tensioner, because you have the belt come in this way around the tensioner, you want all the slack on that left side toward the firewall. Once you do that, get it in and tighten it down and you're good to go. What I like to do is I'll tighten down because the spring attaches to this little post here, and then you've got the pivot here. So I'll push the pulley because it's got a big old groove cut in the middle of it. I'll push the pulley all the way toward this side, tighten it down, I'll run my belt, I'll turn my cam so that it's slightly clockwise from where it should be, and that'll give me all the room I need to get the teeth on, and then I'll turn it back to center. And when it's back at center, I'll clip it on with those metallic paper clips that I do on all of them, the ones that are like little alligators to hold the belt in place. And then, you know, you rotate it back so that it's tight here, and then have all the slack go over the pulley, and then you loosen that bolt because you tightened it in the far position, and you loosen the bolt, it goes snap, and it holds it in place perfectly. So anyway, thanks for watching my video. Of course, the guy I just called back couldn't call me to talk at the time, so he's calling while I'm videoing. Great. But comments, if you have any questions or anything, leave them in the comments below. I'd like to thank you for watching the video, and be sure to click like if you like it, and subscribe if you want to see more like this. Cheers. So there's schools of thought that say that the key should just be upward, and that's the listing for Toyota for 1995, the 1.8, the Corolla LE. And then there are other schools of thought, you know, this is basically the same thing here for the 1.8 liter. And then you look at the 1.5 and it has that flat spot like what I was showing you on the vehicle. Where's my finger? I can't even find it. There it is. So there's that flat spot there, and it's at the very edge of it. And there's another one showing it to be at the edge. And then there's mine that has the flat spot that has the dot in the middle the way I described it, but you're supposed to go by the keyway. So I tried to line up my flat spot to see what would happen, and my keyway was way crooked. And so whereas the specs for mine say it should look like this, but it looks like this with the exciter ring, no, I'm not going to do it this way. So it'd either be here or here. And when I took it off, the marks I made lined it up with the middle, but you're not supposed to go by that. You're supposed to go by the keyway. So I just want to throw this in there to clarify.